Hi, everyone. Welcome to Back in Focus. I'm Karen Tumor here at Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York. And today we are in conversation with Tarell Alvin McCraney. He's the chair of playwriting at Yale School of Drama, recipient of countless awards and honors, including the MacArthur Genius Grant, Academy Award, and a Peabody. So welcome, Tarell, who joins us from Miami. Hello.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Welcome. Well, we are so excited that you're here. I mean, we know you, of course, for your screenplay for Moonlight, for your work on David Makes Man, for your play Choir Boy. I'm really excited for you to be here because what you're really skilled at is helping to interpret those big moments in people's lives or in our collective life as communities. And boy, we've been having some really big moments recently. And I think that if the audience is like me, we're trying to understand how do we kind of start to process and make sense of things. This week, of course, clearly we had the Chauvin trial, we had the verdict, but the struggle goes on for justice and equality here in the United States and indeed around the world. Racial justice, LGBTQ, gender, social class, region. I mean, we could go on. And art is often in the middle of it, right? Art is often right there in the middle. So I guess I'll start with my first question, which is, does art still play? And at the same time, um, theaters are closed and businesses are closed, and we're not gathering together in the way that we usually do. So is art still providing that same function? Is it still serving that same role as truth interpreter or truth teller as it usually does in society?
Well, art doesn't do anything on its own, right? Art, we have oftentimes commodified the word art to make it seem as if it's a thing that sort of jumps up and acts by itself. It doesn't. It moves from people, and people will always find a way, which is this sort of extraordinary experience of artists, but of Black people specifically, Black artists specifically. For example, yes, theaters are down, but somehow there are a group of artists that have found a way to make us feel like coming together over a live stream, listening to music from the past and the present is a way to engage and be together and to have memories and to think things through and to even discourse some of the things that are present day on our minds, right? There are folks who are constantly looking at how do we continue to do the thing that's most innate in us, which is, again, making some sense out of the chaos and around us, right? And making some sense out of all the things that are happening. And I think, to me, I'm wildly excited about the ways in which I've watched my students. I've watched early career artists really step into a kind of form, right? Because the industries are down, right? They've had space to figure out, okay, well, who knows this virtual space better than us, right? Who know the generations who have been raised with the internet, right? I count myself as a late millennial in that I was born in the 80s, and I didn't grow up with a computer in my house, but every class I went to from age kindergarten to through 12 had a computer and had some access to the World Wide Web. Well, there are people who grew up before they could walk. They had iPads and iPhones in their hands, and now they're creating art and they're making music, right? And they're making events and videos on places like Twitter, and they're leading up, they're branding themselves. They're having an interface that is, again, wholly different than the way the industry worked even 15 years ago. And that's exciting. At the same time, there's a great disparity, right? We still don't see the sort of old machinations of industry in music or film sort of finding ways to be inclusive to these early career artists, and especially these Black early career artists. We're finding that, there's still people trying to hold out. But the models are changing, right? So you mentioned the Academy Awards. I actually haven't seen every film that's nominated for Best Picture, but the ones I have seen are very reminiscent of the films, for example, that I saw at Sundance this year. Right? They are made at a specific budget. Their producer level is a lot more diverse. So if they do win that Academy Award, they'll get on stage and there'll be people who look like the people who made the film or who are in the subject of the film, and that's important. That's a powerful message. That's saying to people, to young folks who are trying to finance films and trying to find a way to get the industrial, the business model behind the art to work. That there is a way, that there can be, that there is access, but it's still tough. It's not all open. But I think these circumstances of the industry having to take a pause have helped in some ways, and hopefully we won't come out of this the same industry we were before we went in.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the Academy Awards just very, very briefly. I mean, when you look at the standout films and the standout performances, on the surface, this crop certainly is more diverse, topic-wise. From deafness to nomads to Black Panthers to women in very strong roles, to women directors. On the surface, it is more diverse. Is this the sign that the old guard is really making good on its promise to open things up a bit and actually deliver more diversity at that level of filmmaking?
I don't, to be fair, in full disclosure, I'm not a part of the Academy. I was never invited
To
to
be
be.
sure. Mm-hmm.
So I can't speak for the inner workings of what's happening
Mm-hmm.
there. What I will say is that there are producers and artists who are, doing stellar things. They're putting together stories in ways that people aren't expecting, and I think they are really making sure that folk. I mean, look at Minari. I mean, I think it's sort of staggering to me to see a film that. I mean, Barry Jenkins actually said this. You just reminded me of it. I remember Barry saying this very briefly after Moonlight won Best Picture. Barry adapted and directed Moonlight, and is also from Miami. But he said something that was really kind of that threw me for a second. He was like, there's a very strange feeling about being the first this late, right? Then this late to be the first anything, the first woman, the first Black person, the first Black company, the first. It at once feels you feel proud, and that also like this is late, right? And so when I think of looking at that film and thinking, oh my God, why haven't we seen more films about families who uproot and try and make I mean, this is, if we know our country is made up of immigrants, of people who are trying to, tap into this, the literal bootstrap dream, right? Of getting your boots dirty, making a farm, making a life. We know that so many different avenues of the world have come here to try to do that. The fact that story is not as common as it should be. It is in our minds, but it isn't in our art. It's kind of staggering, and yet it's a beautiful portrait. It's intimate, and also ties into, like you said before, these sort of larger questions of our lives. And I think that's what, to me, that's what's always so interesting. It's like, how do you catch that one specific thing over in the corner? Not the entirety of the thing. It didn't take on immigration. It didn't take on the entirety of anti-Asian racism in the United States, but it took this much of a domestic story and showed just how epic and strong and powerful that intimacy can be.
Right, and you mentioned two words that I had noted down: intimacy and a sense of almost of longing. I watched that film at home, and I kept on hitting pause, and it occurred to me that so many of this crop of movies, even if the multiplex had been open, the posture for me to really enjoy them was curled up on my couch,
Sure.
because I wanted to be, as a child of immigrants, I wanted to be able to stop and talk about,
Hmm.
with my family, watching our immigrant story and say, oh, that happened to us when we moved. My parents were, and they just came from England via the Caribbean, right? But still,
Hmm.
in America, how different it was. That, we had that same, experience, that we embraced a part of America that other Americans were like, well, no, that's not what Americans do. Um, um, what is it about, again, this kind of through line of some of these films, they're not action movies, right? This focus on the action is about intention. The action is about interpretation of thought. The action is an exchange of ideas. It's not car chases. They're not big kind of blow 'em up sort of films, this round of movies that have been, gaining a lot of attention. Billie Holiday, a very intimate, very inside.
Hmm.
You want to sit there and really listen to the language. Are we getting? It's kind of a weird question, but are we getting the movies that we deserve, or how does that work?
Well, I think, I mean, to be fair, I think every filmmaker that I've seen, I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but the films that I've been seeing, so I mentioned Sundance. There's a film called Passing, and I thought was extraordinary, and they just sold to Netflix right after Sundance. It's a beautiful, beautiful film with some beautiful performances in it. And because Sundance was virtual, I sort of plugged my computer into, my television and watched there, and had a really great experience. The same with a piece called Land, that was by Robin Wright, um, and many other features, many other pieces that I got to see that I was really excited about. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I know what this is, because I had spent so many times watching Moonlight, from my computer, because we had to watch the cuts. People would send you, and the first time I actually saw Moonlight in a theater with people was when I was in Toronto, um, and yeah, I'm sitting there in this theater of almost 2,000 people, and I mean, the sound, it's huge, it's sweeping, and I felt all the feelings that I had as a child, I no longer was an artist who had made this thing. I was an audience member who was reliving some very traumatic moments, and you're that experience of being surrounded by strangers, or immediate loved ones, and then other strangers, and watching a thing like that, that's not going to go away for human beings. We love that too, right? And so I think what we're seeing is art that can do both, right? I imagine watching and again, the streaming numbers on Godzilla versus Kong, they don't lie either. People still want, that action. People still want, a story that delights our senses in that way. And we'll, I think there's a statistic going around right now that there are a bunch of people, even as we speak, renting out movie theaters so that they can watch the premiere of Mortal Kombat with their friends, right? So, so that need to be in that and have that experience is still there. And sometimes even for our more intimate films, but I do think, like you said, not that this isn't these aren't in opposite of each other. They are a part of. I think your experience of needing to stop, wanting to talk about it, needing to get a drink of water, think about it some more, sit back down, reflect, rewind, go back again. It's also a part of our movie going experience now. And I think a lot of artists, again, who are growing up with that understanding are creating art that can do both, right?
So, yeah. So that whole so streaming, and that young people and creative people growing up with that understanding, that a play or a film or a piece of art, any type of art, it can be that big blockbuster experience, or it can be on my device, or it can be on my big screen TV at home, or it can be on my laptop, and they're adapting. But is it making it easier perhaps for younger artists to find their audiences because of things like streaming, because you can go more immediately to an audience on a smaller scale? Is it making it a little easier perhaps for the cost of doing business, the business model, if you will? Is it easier than before?
No.
No, really?
No, it's just different.
Different.
And here's what I would say. The connectivity of the age of information has definitely shifted the way in which we engage with audiences, right? But you also have to remember the age of information has changed the way audiences consume things. So that means, right, you've got about 5.5 seconds, right? As opposed to with a television show, they used to say you've got 3 minutes, right? 3 minutes of the teaser to get a person hooked, right? Or a film, there's like 10 minutes of it before people will tune out. Like you've got, what's your opening image, right? Even the way we talk about creating the art in order to engage the audience, it has shifted because people are scrolling fast on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, you name it. And if you don't catch their eye or ear or in this amount of time, right, they're on to the next thing. And so even though you may get even though you may get the impression, you may not get the like, you may not get the engagement. And and with the age of information, there's so many artists, right? Just check out the roster at Netflix, or check out even when Disney sort of went through all the things that it was going to put out in the Marvel universe. Everybody kind of got exhausted at some point, thinking, "Wow!" And so they're doing a thing where they're staggering these lead outs because we just know we have so much information, and the overwhelming possibility for our brains to categorize it, to engage it, it's just not possible. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, there's this idea of like, oh, we've got access to people, and artists have access. It's easier, and it's like, and Peter Brook used to say all the time, there's no such thing as a good or bad audience. It's just it's just you're working to get to them changes, right? And like how you have to figure out, all right, well, I know that my niece who is 14 years old, I know how fast we can sit down at television and she's bored, right? And so if she can't say, Alexa, play this, and it comes up, we're done. So, how do I make a movie that centers her, but also her experience of the world, right? And the good news is that there are people who will and can do it. But I think, again, we think that something is getting closer or becoming easier for those artists. And I think it's the same. I think they have just as many obstacles as we did of getting people to actually show up to the theater, right? Getting people to turn on a Zoom at a certain at a certain time after they've been Zooming all day is hard.
So you're at Yale School of Drama. What are you hearing from your students, the young people that you're working with? Are they excited? Are they asking different questions of you, of their profession?
Yes.
Is it daunting? Are they frightened? And I mean, all students are always frightened when you're starting a new career or relaunching yourself. All of the above.
Oh yeah, and they listen. They should be. They should be. They should be optimistic for sure, but they should also be, concerned. There are things, and again, there are inequities that exist, and to pretend like they don't is sort of, we have at our current department at the School of Drama for playwriting. are all people who identify as people of color, and they're going into an industry that is doing that thing that it does, which is it cycles in this moment of we're gonna do better, right? And then we sort of wait, and all of a sudden we'll find ourselves in 5 years from now not doing better, right? Like that they've ticked the boxes, but the sort of inroads and infrastructure that need to be built to sustain aren't there, right? And industry, again, I didn't get a degree in business, but I recognize enough to know that if you want something to maintain in an industry or in a business, you have to build the infrastructure for it to maintain. It can't be something, we do for a season. It has to be something that is a part of the culture, but also the business model.
What would you like to see built that's not being built, or not being supported adequately beyond words?
Here's a way I'll describe it. So there are a lot of programs to start writers who, or there were a couple of programs for Black women who wanted to write, to get experience, to see, to sort of come on to a writer's room at a level of being a script assistant, right? The program never trains people who are very talented of what that job actually is. I couldn't do that job. Like if I just got into a room, that job requires you to take copious notes of everybody's ideas and to spit them back at folks so that when you're breaking out a story like Modern Family or, any of the hit sitcoms we know about, you have taken all those notes and can read them back to people so they can go, oh yeah, there's that good idea. We can string this along. If you spent 4 years in undergrad just cultivating your own ideas, those two jobs aren't the same. And so again, giving somebody the opportunity to do something without providing them the infrastructure and the experience to do it well doesn't help them rise to the next level, right? And so it's just things like that. It's like if you really are interested in making sure that someone is not only pipelined into the industry, but has sustainable tools and craft to get to the next level. Because again, there are a lot of talented people, right? And yes, we do want to open the door for those many talented people who are often overlooked because of things like gender and race. But don't not give them the skills to get to that next level and then say, oh, well, they did succeed. It's like that's not actually helpful. It's like bringing someone into an automotive industry and saying, oh, you're talented in designing cars. Now rebuild this carburetor. It's like, well, no, that's a designer, right? You have to actually help them understand how to build a carburetor. So those things, those simple, steps that we sort of overlook, that become systemic and then end up to people getting the reputation of being hired as a diversity hire, and that's just not true.
And do you on the content side, is it always a positive to have there be an interest in more, I'll just call it Black content? Is that always good? Or is there ever a concern that there may not be a full appreciation or understanding of the real significance of some of the subject matter to Black and brown people? And so,
well, listen, Black and brown people, people of color are the global majority, right? And so I think any industry that is not looking for the myriad stories connected to those experiences is missing out, right? It's missing out on like the many ways. And so, we saw with Small Axe on Amazon. I think I can name maybe 2 other films I've seen that deal with the British Caribbean experience, the Black British Caribbean experience. I think, and again, it goes back to what Barry said. It's sort of weird for something to be the first, but also like you're so proud of it. It's such a beautiful achievement. And so again, there are so many. So to your question, I'm not avoiding it at all. I think interest in the Black experience and the stories in the Black from the Black community it is fine. It doesn't bother me, or nor does it heighten, because the majority of the things that I'm thinking about, and this is very personal, I'm always thinking like, okay, well, how can I make sure that Black people are seeing these stories of themselves, right? And I'm most interested in making sure that stories about the Black experience in Cuba are being seen by Black Cubans. You know what I mean? About I'm interested in making sure that the stories about Miami Jamaicans are seen by Miami Jamaicans, and similar. I mean, it's the reason why David Makes Man was so important for us to be on the OWN network, right? We knew that there was a large audience of Black folk who tuned into that network to see themselves. And I wanted this very, complicated conversation about overcoming trauma and finding new solutions to live and not just survive, was seen by the people who might know and understand or have seen that experience within their community.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish your thought. And I have one final
question. That was important to me.
Yeah. So what are you working on next that you can share with us?
Oh, well, I'm working on season 2 of David Makes Man. Mm-hmm. We, I think a teaser went out yesterday, mm-hmm. or a trailer went out yesterday. And so that is supposed to, I think, air on the 22nd of June. And so we've been working on that under COVID protocols, which has been interesting. But also very, again, it's always great to get a reminder that without the people, without like actual people and their safety being the most important thing, the work is, if people don't feel safe, if people don't know you're looking out for their safety, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it's gonna fail, right? So you've got to make sure folks are, as being as safe and feeling as safe as possible. So that's been a great reminder to me about who we center when we make our art. I am teaching most of the time while doing that, which has been extraordinary, and working on a play at for Steppenwolf, which is a home theater company in Chicago.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. Hopefully you'll come back and talk with us maybe later on in the fall. I would love to continue this conversation. So Tarell, Alvin, McCraney, thank you very much. Next week, you're going to want to watch this interview, Tarell. I think it's going to be a good one. We're going to be talking about racism as a public health crisis with Dr. Michelle Williams, Dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. This is going to be a really, really fascinating conversation. Until then, for Black in Focus, I'm Karen Toulon for Bloomberg. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.